From Visiting Angels, professional caregivers assisting adults in bathing, dressing, meals, and light housework nationwide. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care. Office locations are at visitingangels.com. And from the listeners who support this NPR station. From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. A week from tonight, President Trump is supposed to deliver a State of the Union address to Congress and the nation. Now, whether he will or not is an open question. The White House is moving ahead with plans, but no word yet on whether House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will give him the permission he needs. She had suggested last week that Trump postpone his speech until after the shutdown ends, or maybe just deliver a written version and skip the speech part. Well, uncertainty over the mechanics of this year's speech has given us reason to reconsider the century-old tradition of the State of the Union. Joining me now is NPR's Ron Elving. Hi, Ron.
Hey, Mary Louise.
So the century-old tradition, I just called it, and I did not know until quite recently that the president is not actually required to show up on Capitol Hill and deliver a big old State of the Union speech. When did that actually begin?
Woodrow Wilson was really reviving the idea of reporting in person to Congress in 1913 when he gave his first report, but it was originated actually by George Washington in 1790. Before the Capitol building as we know it was ever built. Wilson was a college professor, and he loved the idea of lecturing Congress and laying out his agenda. And plenty of other presidents have loved that idea too. They started putting them on the radio in the 20s and on television in 1947.
The Capitol awaits the arrival of President Truman to deliver his message on the State of the Union.
And since then, presidents have pretty much wanted to have that opportunity to reach the big national audience.
You mentioned television, which is a reminder, I guess, of the optics of this, that if it were to go ahead, Nancy Pelosi would, of course, be sitting there right behind the president. And it's also a reminder this is her chamber. She gets to decide who addresses it.
And actually, Nancy Pelosi introduced George W. Bush back in 2007 after the Democrats had taken control of the House of Representatives at that time.
I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
And that is how, in general, the Congress has shown its respect for the President of the United States.
You're describing some of the traditions behind all this. What about just the message? How powerful a platform is this for the president? Do these speeches tend to resonate?
They do in historic moments such as FDR announcing the 4 freedoms that we would fight for if we were to be pulled into World War II.
We look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms.
LBJ declaring unconditional war on poverty.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
George W. Bush in 2003 set the stage for the invasion of Iraq that was coming in March, with a series of accusations about Iraq seeking weapons of mass destruction.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
That, of course, was later repudiated as an accusation against Iraq. Barack Obama in 2014, following a government shutdown the previous fall, took that opportunity to chastise the members of Congress who had pressed for that shutdown.
When our difference is shut down government, or threaten the full faith and credit of the United States, then we are not doing right by the American people.
A moment of prescience, perhaps, for the former president.
You know, one of the things that strikes me about the State of the Union is what a security nightmare it is. All of those people in one chamber, so much so that they always leave one member of the cabinet in an undisclosed location. But that, combined with the shutdown, is this an opportunity to shake it up, how the speech unfolds every year?
Many would like it to be such a moment. This has perhaps outlived its usefulness. We're now used to seeing the president. It does give a certain advantage, of course, to the incumbent president, and the opposition party is never terribly happy about that, giving him an entire hour to present his case on any number of controversial subjects, and certainly we would anticipate that would be the case again this year.
NPR's Ron Elving. He is senior editor and correspondent on the Washington desk. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Mary Louise.
It's early days still, but the Democratic field of 2020 presidential candidates is growing. The latest to throw in her hat, California Senator Kamala Harris. Harris has branded herself a progressive, but she also carries political baggage that opponents may use to question her progressive credentials. Controversial decision she made as a prosecutor and attorney general of California.
Chris Catalogo is a reporter for Politico. He's been following Harris's career for years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
So you were based in Sacramento during the years when she was a federal prosecutor, right? Based on what you saw at the time, how was her tenure characterized?
As an attorney general, people often criticize Kamala Harris for being overly cautious, basically for siding with law enforcement too often. And I think some of those cases where that came up were some statewide ballot initiatives where she did not take a position on one in particular that would have reduced some felonies to misdemeanors.
Now, when you look at a potential candidate, I'll say like a Joe Biden, people are already talking about his role in the mid-90s in terms of the crime bill, right? And its connection to mass incarceration. Is there anything like that for Kamala Harris that could kind of come back as a criticism?
So even though Kamala Harris has long been personally opposed to the death penalty, she made a vow when she ran statewide in California that she would uphold the law of the land. And there was a sort of famous case in Orange County where the issue of the death penalty came before her office, and her office actually took the side of the state and argued that the death penalty should stand. And her critics now point to that and say, you know, that was an opportunity for her to really take a stand and say, you know, this should not be the law of the land in California, and that's not something that she did.
We saw just as recently as the last presidential election issues of criminal justice coming to the forefront in the Democratic primary. Can you talk about how different the politics are now for this next crop of candidates, and including Kamala Harris?
Sure, yeah. We were just starting to hear a lot of those sort of voices creeping up within the Democratic Party at the time in 2016. Now I think people have really come to digest the new environment that we're in, with really the Black Lives Matter movement really taking hold across the country. And I think you've seen prosecutors across the country come out and really take much stronger, what some folks would call activist positions. Folks in Kamala Harris's camp who have come up a couple, maybe a generation or two before them, really were a lot more in line with this sort of standard law and order prosecutor that sort of defended the law of the land, even though she did take some other approaches in her career.
So what does that mean looking forward to 2020? How do you think she tries to reframe this resume?
She's really going to position herself as a progressive prosecutor, and a public interest attorney, as she calls it, someone who worked on behalf of the people. She had clients, so to speak, who were sexually assaulted, young women and girls, and she was in the courtroom trying to seek justice for them. That is something that she's going to point out. And I think a lot of environmental laws related to California, where she was taking on the big polluters. So I think she has to really own this profile as a prosecutor and talk about the ways in which she did things differently.
What are you going to be looking for in the coming weeks?
I think the question, she has a speech in Oakland on Sunday, which is supposed to really mark the start of her campaign. And I think that speech is going to take place only a few blocks from where she worked for years at the Alameda County Courthouse. And so there's a lot of symbolic value to the location. And I think this part of her record is something she's going to have to explain to people. And she's going to lead with this idea that she was not only a prosecutor, but a progressive prosecutor.
Chris Catalogo is a reporter for Politico. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
This is the Engines of Our Ingenuity, made possible in part by NG, sustainable energy and tools for efficiency and carbon reduction.
Today, an economic wonder. The University of Houston's College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. The conceptual foundation of communism stems from the philosophy of Karl Marx, but it was Vladimir Lenin who was first responsible for bringing it to life. Yet on the eve of the October Revolution, it was clear Lenin hadn't worked out all the details. The point of the uprising is the seizure of power, he wrote. Afterwards, we'll see what we can do with it. Soviet mathematician and economist Leonid Kantorovich was among those entrusted with figuring out how to run the Soviet economy. Reflecting on the task a half-century later, Kantorovich wrote, "For the first time in history, all the means of production passed into the possession of the people, and there arose the need for centralized control of the economy. In other words, someone somewhere in the Soviet hierarchy had to decide what got made. It was a huge departure from free market economies, where price and money are central to what gets made and who gets the goods. Kantorovich was faced with the problem of how to optimally produce and distribute goods without the aid of prices. How many cars should be produced? Kitchen tables? Rolls of tissue? He proceeded by developing mathematical methods for solving central planning problems. And in the process, he discovered something quite astonishing at the time. Finding the best mix of things to produce required finding prices. Prices were deeply, fundamentally intertwined with production. Kantorovich was aware of the politically sensitive ramifications of his discovery. His early papers never used the word price, but instead used terms like objectively determined valuation. The initial reaction by Soviet economists was quite guarded, but over the years, perspectives changed. Kantorovich's work was just too significant to ignore, even if the corrupt, bureaucracy-laden Soviet economy couldn't make proper use of it. In 1965, Kantorovich was honored, somewhat ironically, with the highly prestigious Lenin Prize. And 10 years later, still 15 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall, Kantorovich received the Nobel Prize in Economics. The prize committee praised him for demonstrating, quote, the connection between the allocation of resources and the price system. The mathematical methods developed by Kantorovich and others live on, generating prices just as surely as they produce production plans. Today's students learn how to apply the methods in business, economics, and engineering classes, not for controlling economies, but for solving a breadth of problems like routing signals through a phone network or delivering food to the needy. The methods save the world economy hundreds of billions of dollars every year. But just as importantly, the work by the Soviet Kantorovich, performed in the cradle of communism, has given us penetrating insights into price and the working of free markets. I'm Andy Boyd at the University of Houston, where we're interested in the way inventive minds work.
A transcript of this Engines of Our Ingenuity episode, number 2857, is online at uh.edu/engines. Additional episodes are available by podcast.
How you doing? It's 4:48. I'm Jared Carroll. Coming up in Los Angeles, the teachers union and school district have reached a tentative agreement to end the strike.
For a city that embraced the idea that public education matters, that children matter, that teachers matter, today is a day full of good news.
Now union members have to vote. That story at 5:10 on News 88.7.
We take most things for granted, like our morning coffee. But there are a lot of people behind that cup of coffee. And A.J. Jacobs set out to thank all of them.
That's what it made me realize, is how interconnected everything is. It doesn't just take a village to make a cup of coffee, it takes the world.
Ideas around gratitude and appreciation. That's next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
TED Radio Hour, that is tonight on News 88.7.
This Week in This American Life. I don't know if this has been clear to you, but we've been on the air for years now. A couple of years ago, we passed a milestone, our 500th show. And this week, another landmark, show 666. What would be appropriate?
Hail Satan!
Hail Satan! Prince of Darkness, and his many surprising manifestations this week.
This American Life, that is tomorrow night at 9 on News 88.7. Support for Houston Public Media comes from the Master Liberal Studies program at Rice University, part-time graduate degree in humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, and proud sponsor of Think at 1 p.m. Monday through Friday on News 88.7. Support also comes from the Moody Center for the Arts at Rice University, hosting a night of philosophy and ideas, public evening of art, music, dance, and debate centered on ecology, January 26th, beginning 7 p.m. More moody.rice.edu. Watch for a crash South Loop westbound Cullen. They're blocking several lanes. Pretty stacked in that area. It's 4:50. Good afternoon.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. Zimbabwe is currently the most expensive place in the world to fuel up a car. That is according to the website Global Petrol Prices, and it follows the government in Zimbabwe more than doubling the price of gasoline and diesel last week, which has made people in Zimbabwe mad. These past few days have seen protests in the capital, Harare, and the country's second biggest city, Bulawayo. Government forces have now cracked down violently. Human rights groups say at least 12 people have died. Many more have been arrested. Well, joining us now is Tendai Marima. She is in Bulawayo. She's a local journalist there in Zimbabwe. Hi, Tendai.
Hi, Mary Louise.
Paint me a picture of just how chaotic things have gotten where you are and in Harare over these past few days.
Over the past few days, we've seen people rebelling and rejecting the president's announcement to raise the prices of fuel. So people have called for action and, gotten in the streets, burning tires, barricading the streets with metal objects, and, at some point the protest also took a
Oh every